We're sticking with the PC for this week's review. I played Inversion, a game I truthfully don't remember purchasing. Was it bought alone? As part of a bundle? Well, I don't remember. But it really doesn't matter how and when I bought it, right? It's all about how fun it is. For the most part, the game is enjoyable to play, although there are a couple of flaws that bring down the fun factor by a few points. Inversion plays out the story of a Davis Russell. Before I proceed on, yes, that's his name. Davis Russell. Not Russell Davis, which sounds a lot more natural, but Davis Russell. Moving on. He's a police officer, it seems, in some sort of city. I think it's called Vanguard City. Davis needs to head home to give his daughter a birthday present, and his partner, Leo something or other, decides to tag along because he has nothing else to do. Suddenly they have a near miss with some pedestrians and other cars, and crash their own vehicle. Soon they find some strange soldiers that look like they came from the past shooting up civilians, and Davis and Leo start shooting them down, and head deeper into the fray just to figure out what's going on. Eventually, they'll come across a point where a milk carton is just floating in midair. Leo plays around with it a bit, and finds out that the gravity is just acting all sorts of funny at places. As they get closer to the main attack force, they'll find more of those strange-looking enemies that are fighting with what seems to be primitive gear, and a bit later, Davis finds his wife, dead. They get captured, and from here, the story continues on. I won't spoil it, but we'll only see that Davis is fighting on simply just to find his daughter, and will stop at nothing to find her. They'll eventually find the kids are being taken away to some camp, but they don't know why. Davis and Leo are determined to find out, and this is the main plot of the game. Figure out where the kids are, save them, and then fight off the strange invading force. There is a huge plot twist a good chunk of the way into the game, and I'll probably talk about it later, but don't worry. If I do, I will warn you before I begin. That way you don't have to bitch. The strange invading force are called Luchadors, in which I can't help thinking it makes them sound like Mexican professional wrestlers. Yes, I know, that's a luchador, but same difference, right? Anyway, these guys might look like they're from the BC age with weapons made of scrap metal, but they're still pretty deadly if you're not careful. And these weapons are primarily what you'll be grabbing. The main weapon looks like a cheap knockoff of an AK-47, but you'll also find 2 variations of shotguns, a few other rifles, including a sniper rifle, and a Gatling gun and rocket launcher. You can carry 2 weapons at a time, plus a few grenades. Truthfully, that AK-like weapon is probably one of the best you can find, and I carried it with me a good chunk of the game. I will admit that some of the energy-based weapons are fairly fun to use though, simply because it erupts your enemy into a gout of flames. But using the shotgun to shoot off limbs is always fun too, especially when floating around zero gravity areas. Speaking of, that's the main selling point of the game, gravity manipulation. You'll eventually obtain a piece of gear that allows you to throw a blast of zero gravity energy, making anything in its radius float helplessly. Enemies will be stunned for a short time, allowing you to get some free shots in. They'll eventually recover themselves and fight back, even while floating. And enemies aren't all that are affected. Any debris can be made to float too, and you can press a key to grab anything that's floating and fling it at your enemies. You can also grab any weapons that are floating, in case you need ammunition. A bit later on in the game, you can also get an upgrade to that gravity device whose name I can't remember. This upgrade actually increases the gravity in the range you specify, which halts the heavier enemies in their tracks and can absolutely destroy the normal run-of-the-mill ones. In addition, you can press the Q key to activate a high gravity shield, and this somehow protects you from all attacks as long as the energy meter holds out. This shield is almost required in some of the more difficult parts of the game, but the other gravity attacks are only really used sparingly, such as a time where you have to hurl balls of lava at an enemy. Sure, you can use them at will, but I didn't find as much use for them as I would have liked. What can I say, I'm more of a basic run and gun type. If that's all Inversion had for gravity manipulation, the game would be disappointing. But of course, there's some more parts of the game where you have more fun with gravity. At some points of the game, you will enter zero gravity zones. These are fun but can be seriously disorienting. The game doesn't always give you a clear idea on where you need to float to, until you're practically on top of the objective marker. So you might be moving from one rock to another, just trying to see an area you haven't been to. That's not to say that this isn't enjoyable though. Enemies will attack you, and are limited by the gravity just as much as you are. But the best part are the physics in place of these segments. Anything that just gets separated, just floats around. This includes guns, dust, dismembered limbs, and even blood. Very cool. The other thing the game will do with gravity deals with the blue jump points. You won't encounter these often, but when you do, you walk onto it, and you'll be bounced to another plane. In these zones, you'll be walking and battling on walls and ceilings. Just as much detail went into these zero-G areas. If you kill someone, they'll fall off in the proper direction. When running down the side of the building, you'll see dust fall the same direction you're moving. Again, I love seeing this kind of attention. The catch is that the game doesn't seem to give you a chance to walk on surfaces that aren't the floor very often. Sure, it's a nice change of pace when you do see them, or even enter the zero gravity areas, but it seems like Inversion doesn't take true advantage of this type of gameplay. Most of the game you're running around shooting Ludadors in normal environments. You're excited to find one of these blue anomalies, and then a few minutes later, that segment is over and you're back to your run-of-the-mill shooting. I think it would have been more fun if you could jump to a wall at will, but hey, I'm not a game designer. So let's talk about the Ludadors for a bit. Again, they feel like a very primitive enemy force, but because of this, they're actually somewhat humorous. You can't really understand what they're saying, but the subtitles will give you keywords. I actually laughed a few times just listening to these guys. But the game starts getting a bit frustrating when dealing with the bosses. It's not that they're difficult, because most of them aren't, but it may take a few tries to get their patterns down. But the catch is that you encounter each boss a few times in the game, and their patterns don't change all that much, if at all. Usually, they just get more health. It's like the developers of the game didn't have enough ideas on enemy types, so they just repeated them. It's not a huge deal, since at least the final battle against the head Ludador is different, but it's still something I want to mention. You know, I was going to mention that huge plot twist, but I think I'm going to go against it. It's just too huge to mention, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone that wants to play the game. So, I'll just move on to a few strange oddities, because the game isn't perfect. For one, the sound effects seem to be too loud compared to everything else in the game. Footsteps thunder across small hallways, and the speech that occurs immediately afterwards seems soft. Bit weird, but oh well. Next, there are a few areas where there are some cheap deaths. Most notable of this is the security bot that you encounter. You might have full health, but then it suddenly fires a barrage of rockets that doesn't look like it'll hit you, and then you fall over dead. Bit frustrating, but again, you'll get past it. In some earlier parts of the game, you'll find some beams that need to be crossed. You'll probably fall off of them because you think that the game is trying to tell you to use your movement keys to balance. But instead, you're expected to use the actual arrow keys on your keyboard to balance. This is a bit strange. And again, you'll do this a few times early in the game, and then never see this mechanic again. Not that I miss it much, but why have it at all if you're only going to use it about 3 or 4 times? Finally, the crashing. The game crashed for me no less than 12 times. About 2 of them occurred when transitioning between levels, but the others only happened when I died and tried to reload. But here's the thing, it only seemed to happen when I was running my recording software. If I was recording, then died, I'd try stopping the recording, reload, and then start again. The game seemed to load fine upon doing this. Strange. So, was this the only culprit to the crashing? I don't know for sure, but I've read that the game does happen to crash frequently, so I have a hard time believing that every person that's had issues with the game was recording their playthrough. That's really not the only performance issue though. I have noticed that the main menu and game cutscenes stutter a bit. Again, I would expect this to be a result of dropped frame rate due to my recording, but this wasn't the case as it happened even when I wasn't recording. Again, it's not a huge deal, because the actual gameplay runs pretty smoothly, but it was still something I wanted to mention. I think that's it for Inversion. It's a fun game, even though the combat is pretty standard for this style of game. If it wasn't for the feature of playing with gravity, I'd say that the game is mediocre, but it's because of the gravity manipulation that I'd recommend it. Sadly, it's not used often, but at least it's fun. Add in the good music and story, and you'll probably keep playing to see what happens. Granted, the story does get depressing at the end, and there are a few plot holes that you can't help but wonder what happens next. But somehow I feel like we won't see a sequel to this, so any subsequent events will just have to be created in our imagination. Final score? 8 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.